What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Gaming Ramble Weekly podcast here every single Thursday afternoon on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So wherever you get your podcasts from, make sure you're subscribed. Make sure if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you're giving this a 5-star rating, and on YouTube, give it a like. Comment down below your thoughts. It's Gaming Ramble Weekly, folks. In the middle of a heat wave, yes, that's right, here in the UK, we are experiencing a heat wave now. If you don't know, the UK is not ready for heat waves because we have this one crucial thing that's missing in our lives, and that is aircon. That's right. I'm sitting here in Northern Ireland. I'm warm, but I know that a lot of people in England, they're 10 degrees warmer. That's serious stuff. So I'm going to do my best to get through this podcast without melting, but you may see the old brow getting wiped from time to time, as regardless of the fact that it is cooler here in Northern Ireland than elsewhere in the UK, it is still mega warm. I hope you're doing very well. I hope you've had a good week and you're ready for more gaming ramble from me to get you through until next week. So as always, where do we start? Well, of course we start with what I have been playing in the last 7 days. And to tell you the truth, I haven't been playing a whole lot. Haven't had that much time. But I did get maybe the worst titled game of all time. Whenever you read, if I told someone who wasn't into games the title of this game, they would look at me like I was a silly goose. I've been playing The Adventures of Elliot, The Millennium Tales. Came out last week. It was one I was interested in because it's the most Zelda-like game that isn't Zelda but looks high quality that I've seen in quite a while. And I thought, right, I'm going to get it from a Switch. It feels like a good Switch game, an on-the-go type game. That's 2 in a row. That's Made of the Hollower and The Adventures of Elliot. I've played about 3 hours. I think it's good, but there's a lot of a lot of dialogue, and this is definitely what I would call a podcast game. If you're anything like me, there are some games that you can play with the volume off, and you can just listen to a podcast or put a video on in the background. And of course there's games where you have to be super locked in. Adventures of Elliot, to me, is not a game that you need to be super locked in for. That is absolutely a podcast game. The gameplay's simple, easy. The main draw for me so far is the exploration elements. So it feels like there's plenty to do out in the world. I'll not get into too many details because the game's only out 6 days, and if you're wanting to play it for yourself, I'll not spoil it for you, but basically there's lots of exploration. There's like the equivalent of shrines, let's call them that. And you've got small dungeons that end with boss fights. So, it's pretty good. I like it so far. I love the HD 2D graphic style. I think it's really beautiful. And really looks well on the Switch 2's display. Not a game I'm interested in putting on the TV, if I'm being honest. I'm happy enough playing it handheld. Sitting out in the garden when the sun's out, playing a bit of Elliot. Sounds weird. It is what it is. If you've picked that up, let me know what you think in the comments. Didn't review massively well, and I can kind of see why, because I'm 3 hours in, and I still feel like I'm in a tutorial. I feel like you get maybe 20 minutes of gameplay, and then a conversation happens, and then you get 25 minutes of gameplay, and then a long conversation happens. And I'm waiting for the game to let me just do my own thing. The other thing I want to mention is Kena, Bridge of Spirits. Obviously that's been the stream series. Because of the heat, I won't have been streaming the week that this podcast comes out because it's just I cannot function while my PlayStation is pumping out hot air into the room at the same time. I have been playing that game on the hardest difficulty. That will not be continuing because I cannot believe just how difficult this game is at that difficulty. It is so unforgiving. It's literally 3 hits and you're done, and the damage that you do back is nothing. some of the boss fights that aren't really boss fights, when they introduced a new type of enemy, have just been awful. And I was trying to enjoy my experience, and I feel like I've been locked in so much I haven't appreciated what it is about Kena that I loved in the first place. So we're going to reduce the difficulty, because also, I have plans to stream quite a few games this year. On my list at the minute are Claire Expedition, or Claire Obscure Expedition 33, Control Resonant, the Ocarina of Time remake when it comes out, and there's more on the pipeline, so I don't want to get stuck. I thought Kena would be a 4 or 5 week series. I haven't even finished saving the first soul yet, and we're 2 weeks in, so I'm going to reduce the difficulty, and hopefully that way we can get through the story more. It'll not be really easy, but it'll be easier. I also rebooted up Assassin's Creed Shadows, which is, I think, the most forgettable of the new Assassin's Creed games. I can remember moments from Origins, from Valhalla, from Odyssey. I booted that game back up, and I had played 40 hours, I think, when it first came out last year, and I enjoyed some of the systems that Shadows has to offer. But I was, safe to say, I was pretty shocked at how little I remembered. I'm playing it to prep for next week's podcast, but also because I'm trying to finish more games that I just left, and I do like Assassin's Creed as a series, so I'm trying to finish that. So that's been what's been on my list this week. All right, it's time for the big topic. You may have seen the title of this podcast: Game Pass broke Xbox. And nobody noticed. Potentially, that's what I've got as the title now. In terms of what I want to talk about, this is pretty much a follow-on from last week's Gaming News Ramble segment. So if you've missed last week's podcast, make sure and check it out after this. But I want to talk about Game Pass. I want to talk about how I feel that the subscription service that is offered through Game Pass, even through PS Plus, is changing consumer behaviour, and why I think that means that what we're starting to see, and what we will continue to see over time, is that studios will pay the price. So don't get me wrong, Game Pass is a good idea. I think the idea of a subscription service, we've seen it work with TV. Let's talk about what everybody has, right? Everyone's got Netflix or Prime or something like that in their homes, HBO Max, whatever it is that you have, you don't have that, because the TV model has changed completely. You never did buy your TV shows. That's the key. You maybe bought your box sets. You don't need to anymore with subscriptions. But the key difference with the TV market and the gaming market, which we'll get really deep into in this episode, is that the TV studios are not relying on you buying the box set for their survival, because for you to want the box set, you've either heard about it through other people watching it on TV already, or you've watched it yourself and now you want the box set so you can watch it whenever you like. And if the TV companies already bought the rights to the show, then the studios are not worried too much about how much money they get from sales of merchandise or box sets or all that kind of carry on. Of course, it's a lovely bonus, but because it's not their only thing they're worried about, then it works. The games industry is completely different, okay? So in the games industry, you have pockets. You have AAA studios, you have AA studios, you've got your independent studios, all fighting for my attention, your attention, everybody's attention, alright? Games typically last significantly longer than a box set does, depending on what the box set is, of course. But if you have 3 games, let's just really simplify this. Let's say you've got a AAA game, a AA game, and an indie game that come out in 1 month, alright? And the AAA game, most people believe, is an absolute must play. So let's say it's GTA 6, right? comes out that month. Now, it's a inflated example, but I'm just trying to make the point. Let's say that's £70. Everybody wants to play it, so you pick that game up. That game could take you 80 to 90 hours, and maybe in your week or in your month you have 100 hours of gameplay time that you can play. That means you have 10 to 20 hours for your AA game that you wanted to buy and your indie game that you wanted to buy. You're not going to buy all three if you're not going to play all three. So what happens to the indie studio? Because the AA game is a wee bit more appealing to you as the player. You play that game first. The indie studio is the one that needs your money. But they don't get that from you because you have too many games on and you can't play. So then that game doesn't get bought. If that game doesn't get bought enough times, the studio's going to close and then the cycle goes on. Game Pass comes in, and for the indie studios, the smaller studios, it looks like it's going to be a good thing, because if you can get a deal to get your game on this exclusive service, so let's say you're an indie studio, and you manage to negotiate a deal with Xbox to put your game on that system, then that means that more people would be likely to try your game, first of all, because it's free, so there's no cost to entry for them in terms of they've already paid the subscription price, so your game being on there isn't costing them any extra. But also, you have got maybe potentially more revenue from the deal that you've made with the company, whether that's Xbox or PlayStation, than you would have if you'd gone out and sold. So that's why initially, Game Pass looked like such a good thing, and why subscription services look like such a good thing. The problem is, really, to start this, the problem is, where is Xbox right now? So to kind of fully understand my position in all this, let's look at where we are right now with PlayStation and Xbox together, right? As of December 2025, PlayStation had sold just under 90 million units, whereas the Xbox Series X and S had sold 34.1 million, they reckon. So that's like a gap of 55 million units. So PlayStation has more than twice sold the number of Xbox consoles. So that sentence makes sense? I have no idea. The Xbox Series X and S sales fell by 51% between 2023 and 2024, and then again by a further 58% in 2025. Xbox currently is selling fewer consoles than the Nintendo Switch. Not the Nintendo Switch 2, the Nintendo Switch. Then last week, of course, we talked about how Phil Spencer was kicked out. Asha Sharma has come in. It was all about making positive changes, but now, of course, we're looking at potential studio closures, etc. So Xbox are in a really difficult position, which I believe is not just because of Game Pass, but I think Game Pass has become a massive, massive problem for them. So let's look at Game Pass as a whole in terms of, the good of Game Pass, and why for consumers, so for us, Game Pass is probably a great thing. In fact, it's not just probably. In terms of the games library, it's a good thing. I'm just hesitant to say great, because losing out on titles because of Game Pass, I don't think is a great thing. So there's kind of a weird grey area there. So, earlier I talked about how Netflix, HBO Max, how those subscription services proved that we are now in the era of the subscription service. Almost everything is a subscription, down to the New York Times games for Wordle. Do you know what I mean? Like, everything is a subscription. Coming into this PS5 and Xbox Series X generation, Xbox needed to find something new, different, unique, because of the way that the PS4 had dominated that generation and how the PlayStation had the stronger lineups. And we were living in this era of, you could move your digital library from your PlayStation 4 across to your PS5. So brand loyalty was becoming more of a thing based on how you wanted to play or what you wanted to play. One of the first things that Xbox promised with Game Pass, which I still think is my problem with Game Pass, is the day one access to the first party titles. Now, while that is something that PlayStation have never offered, and I don't think ever will offer, it created a lot of excitement for the consumers because you mean that you get to play Call of Duty day one. We can talk more about that later because that has changed. You can play Fable on day one. You can play all these games day one. With the PlayStation, you're going to have to pay £70 for God of War Ragnarok or £70 for The Last of Us or whatever it is. Right? You get the point that I'm making. So, for consumers on a budget, Game Pass objectively is and was a great deal. You know, massive game library, bigger than PS Plus, of course, and a low monthly cost. And for Microsoft, being such a large company, they have the resources to absorb short-term losses while the subscriber base kind of grew. And it did grow. You know, it had 34 million subscribers by early 2024, and it reached 40 million by Q1 2026, so 40 million users of Game Pass, generating $5 billion in annual revenue at its peak. But I don't know if you remember this, but some of those figures, certainly the subscriber numbers, are massively inflated by the number of deals, giveaways, and things that Xbox were doing to try and get more and more people onto Game Pass for at least 3 months to then consider renewing their subscription. They had a get Game Pass for $1 and then resubscribe at that rate, you know, all that kind of stuff. And for a lot of people, you go on to Game Pass and you're probably going to play some games that either you wanted to play and didn't want to buy, or you didn't know you wanted to play. You thought, well, there's no cost to me trying this, so you gave it a go. And you probably got more gaming experience than you thought you were going to. I just want to be clear that the idea of Game Pass isn't wrong, but I think the execution of Game Pass is where the problems lie. I'm going to break it down, and I've prepared this because I feel, you know, this is really important in terms of getting this right, telling you how I feel and why, and I've really gone into it. I've got 5 points as to why I think Xbox Game Pass has, quote, gone wrong for Xbox and why it has led to the current situation we are seeing with Xbox. So, point number 1. Xbox Game Pass has conditioned us as consumers to devalue games. And I could say the same for PS Plus, but I think Xbox Game Pass, because of the day one, get it on day one, has made this problem even worse. If you make your biggest games available day one for that monthly subscription fee, that means that for the consumer, the perceived value of any game is now close to zero. So why would I play this? Why would I buy this indie game for $20 when I can play Fable as part of a subscription I already have? The mentality becomes that the game that isn't on the subscription is wrong for being on the subscription, rather than my behaviour of where I used to buy games and support studios. Now, because of Game Pass, I don't do that anymore, so I don't need to. One of the things that I've noticed about my own kind of behaviour as well is being really more considerate about sales and things, because even with PS Plus, I sometimes have a thought of, do I really want to buy this game now, or is it going to come to PS Plus in a year's time, and will I be happy to play that in a year's time on there. So even I can see it in my own behaviour changing. Ultimately, this behaviour shift means that people now expect day one access and won't pay full price. And it's why I think PlayStation is in a much healthier position than Xbox, because the PlayStation consumer base, the main PlayStation people, and this is not console war stuff again, but the PlayStation base are used to paying for the new games on the day that they want them. So if I really want to play God of War Ragnarok on the day it comes out, I have to be willing to pay 70 I have to be willing to pay £70 for that. Whereas for Xbox gamers, they're used to, if I want to play that day one, it's just part of my Game Pass subscription, and they will not now pay full price, I believe, for good games that deserve to be paid full price for. My second point, Game Pass cannibalized Microsoft's own revenue. Alright, let's talk about this. Black Ops 6, Call of Duty. We know that Xbox paid nearly $70 billion for Activision Blizzard. That gave them access to have Call of Duty as a first-party game. Microsoft internally estimated that Game Pass led to $300 million in lost sales of Black Ops 6 because they made it available on day one on Game Pass. 82%. 82% of Call of Duty Black Ops 6 copies were sold on PlayStation 5. So only 18% of players were coming from Game Pass in the first place. So what does that tell you about Call of Duty and its the player base that are on Xbox in the first place? Let me be very, very clear. This is Microsoft's own data on their own game, confirming what I'm saying. Day one Game Pass destroys sales. Like, it is crazy. Crazy, crazy. Third point as to why I think Game Pass is not a good thing. The hardware collapsed. The demand for hardware collapsed. The price went up and the demand fell. The Series X price rose from $499 to $599 in 2023. PlayStation 5 hadn't changed their prices by then, so consumers moved to PS5, or they just left completely. They were done. And then what I talked about last week, Xbox's own marketing campaign, which was everything is an Xbox. What does that tell people? You don't need to buy an Xbox to play our games. Well, why am I going to buy an Xbox? Which is where you can get Game Pass from. I'm just going to go and, play your games elsewhere. In November 2025, Xbox hardware sales hit a 30-year low. That's not all because of Game Pass, by the way. But it is certainly, I think, contributes to the matter, shall I say. Point number 4. The subscriber growth of Game Pass flatlined and then started falling. So, from 34 million in early 2024 to 40 million by Q1 2026, that's about 10% annual growth, which is nowhere near Microsoft's original projections. In October 2025, they announced a price hike. And what happened? Millions of subscribers left. They lost a ton in revenue. Now they have reduced the price of Ultimate from $29 a month to $22 a month. But when you compare that to what PlayStation offers, their most premium offering is, if you pay it annually, £10 a month. So it's half the price. Now, you might get half the value, and that might be the case, but in terms of sustaining the industry, which is what this is all about, this is not about how good this is for consumers. I'm thinking about studios here, when I'm talking about this. For the studios, the PlayStation way is the way to go because people are still trained to buy the games whenever they come out. And point 5, studios have paid for it. Over 2,500 developers were laid off in 2024 alone. You had Arcane Austin closed, Tango Gameworks that made Hi-Fi Rush closed, although they were later revived by Crafton, another company. And like I said last week, Ninja Theory, Double Fine, and Compulsion Games are now all currently in discussion about closing down or becoming independent. Why? Because their games are on Game Pass, and if they're not on Game Pass, nobody's buying their games, because why would they buy their games if they're available on Game Pass? This is the problem. I've got a couple of quotes from some studio heads, some insiders in the industry. So, Rafael Colantonio, who's the founder of Arcane, who, by the way, were closed by Xbox, said, Game Pass is an unsustainable model that has been increasingly damaging the industry for a decade. Michael Dowse, head of Larian Studios, said, what happens when all that money runs out? I think that's an answer anybody has right now. And then Activision's own leaked FTC documents stated subscription services severely cannibalize buy-to-play sales, especially for day one releases. So this is not just me saying it. I'm not just coming out here being like, oh, look at me, white knighting. These are what people in the industry have felt and said themselves about the situation with Game Pass. Let's talk about the counter-argument to this and why I feel it doesn't hold. So, the case for Game Pass, right, comes down to the following kind of few points. 40 million subscribers and $5 million in revenue isn't nothing. Like, that is real business, and that is good revenue for Xbox, and they should do better with that revenue that they get brought in. Microsoft would argue this is a long-term platform play and not a short-term sales model, building an ecosystem like Steam and not selling individual units. Look how well that's turned out for them. And cloud gaming via Game Pass Ultimate grew 45% year on year in hours played. The future of gaming argument is real. Cloud gaming is very much a real discussion. It's a real possibility. Sometimes I use the stream feature on PlayStation Plus because then it means I don't have to download a game. For the Xbox, where everything was an Xbox, even your face, that whole advert campaign. The cloud gaming system allowed you to go and play your game on your Xbox, and then if you were on holiday, you could play your game on your phone, for example. So that is a strong business case for why you would put money and spend time developing Game Pass and your cloud gaming. But here's what I have to say back to all of those things. Subscriber growth has flatlined, and obviously the price hike led to people leaving. I'm sure this $22 reduction will be interesting to see if that brings people back. But the $5 billion in revenue sounds like a lot whenever you consider that $69 billion was paid for Activision. So, and then you've got the cost of running all the first-party studios as well. So $5 billion doesn't even come close to what you need to hit to maintain your operating costs and get back the money that you paid to get Activision Blizzard in the first place. The studios funding the content are being closed. So the Game Pass model is eating the creative infrastructure it relies on. So the studios that are making the games are closing, which means less games. Game Pass relies on games. How can Game Pass run if these studios are closing down for less games, which means no games in Game Pass? Now, I am more than happy to say that Game Pass can be a great thing. If it's done properly and if it's done right, Game Pass can be fantastic. PS Plus has its own problems too. These subscription services are very much being worked out. The problem is Xbox do not have the time to figure it out. We're at a stage now where Xbox are making decisions that are constantly shooting themselves in the foot. They're leaving themselves into difficult situations, whether they realise it or not. And things like making games exclusive, putting them day one in Game Pass, it only encourages your base of players to spend less money. So no wonder your margins at Xbox are tight. Game Pass wasn't wrong in principle. The subscription model makes sense in theory and genuinely gives players access to games they never have experienced otherwise, and that is so true from my experience with PlayStation Plus. But executed as a day one, everything included service without a sustainable path to profitability, it devalued the games it was supposed to promote, conditioned consumers away from purchasing, and ultimately cannot sustain the studios it depends on. The question now is whether Asha Sharma's reset can course correct, or whether the damage to consumer expectations and first-party creative infrastructure is already too deep to undo. My opinion, it is way too late to reverse the consumer behaviour shift. That is the lasting damage of Xbox. That is of Game Pass, the lasting damage for Xbox, and potentially the reason why we will continue to see the downfall of Xbox over the next few years, months, weeks, whatever that looks like. As someone who loves PlayStation, I want Xbox to be better because it will force PlayStation to also be better. Competition is only a good thing. We are seeing PlayStation make so many misses at the minute with the live service stuff, with some of the decisions they're making with their games, and yet somehow they can get away with all of it. They can get away with all of it because Xbox are just nowhere even close to them. Not even close. But talking about Xbox, why don't we move into Gaming News Ramble and talking about potentially the new competitor to the PlayStation, and that is the Steam machine. Yes, that's right. If you want to have a console that sounds badass, you put your platform title and then you put machine at the end. Why is it not called the PlayStation Machine? We don't know. Let's talk about the Steam Machine. So if you don't already know, early this week, I think it was Monday of this week, as of recording, reviews all of a sudden just dropped for Valve's new console, the Steam Machine, which is effectively, the best way to describe it is you can have your PC gaming library on a console, you can connect it to your TV downstairs, and it means that if you're a PC gamer, you no longer have to be a gremlin up in your room. That's basically it. But here's the issue. So the Steam Machine is launching on the 30th of June. But it is priced at $1,049 for the 512GB model, $1,349 for 2TB, and $1,428 if bundled with, with the new Steam controller. So, $1,049. Why is the console so expensive? What is going on? Well, if you look at the general console market, Sony and Microsoft have had to raise prices driven by various factors. US tariffs and increased memory costs. So DRAM contract prices have gone up over 170% year on year. That's more than double. And there's broader kind of macroeconomic pressures. The PS5 Digital Edition has risen 50% in price since 2020, and in Japan that has nearly doubled in price since its first release in 2020. November 2025, hardware sales hit a 30-year low, both for Xbox, which were down 70% year on year, and PS5 was down 40%, which could be one of two things, right? One, everybody who wants them has already bought the console, or two, customers have hit a price ceiling. The Steam Machine enters the game at $1,049 for just 512 gigabytes of storage, by the way, and makes zero apology for it. Basically, Valve are saying that you're getting a PC at PC prices, not a subsidized console. So they're not willing to take the loss on the console that PlayStation, Nintendo, and Xbox often do. They're basically saying you're buying a PC. Question for you in the comments is $1,049 too expensive? I think yes, personally. Or is it honest pricing now in a market where we're seeing things just go slightly out of hand and all over the place? I kind of think if you're going to buy a Steam machine, you are in a select market, right? You already have a gaming PC because you already have a Steam library. That's one thing. Or you have a Steam Deck or something like that. So you're probably someone that has a bit more money for gaming. I would say that if you're a PC gamer, more so, then you've invested a lot of time and money into that PC. If you're a console player, the way I am, you probably invest more in your experiences rather than the hardware because you're more concerned about playing experiences than having necessarily the top of the range stuff. What do you think about the Steam Machine? Let me know down below. What do you think about the fact that 1.5 terabytes is a $300 extra? This is the world that we're living in, I suppose. Let me know down in the comments below. Story number 2, and the cheery stories continue. Don't Nod may run out of money by autumn 2026. Who are Don't Nod, you might ask? They're a French narrative adventure studio founded in 2008. Now, you might think, well, that means absolutely nothing to me. You've heard of Life is Strange, you've heard of Life is Strange 2, Banisher's Ghost of New Eden, Lost Records, Bloomin' Rage, Jusant, and many, many more. They're the publisher of those games. Don't Nod has declared that it may run out of cash by this autumn 2026, so let's say 3 to 5 months' time, because Tencent, the Chinese-based company that has loads of mobile games and has its fingers in lots of different pies, is now uninterested in funding further projects. And this reminds me of, in the sporting world, the way that the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund pumped loads of money into different sports, so live golf, football, the wrestling, boxing, Riyadh season, all that kind of stuff. And they're now very content with the work they've done, and they're very slowly kind of pulling out of those deals and situations. And the future of live golf is on tenterhooks and things like that. So that's kind of where we're at. Both Jusant and Banisher's Ghosts of New Eden failed to meet sales expectations. Lost Records, Bloomin' Rage also underperformed commercially. And while there is a Netflix deal for a narrative game, it is unclear whether that is enough to stabilise the business. It's yet another business going under the pressure of gaming. I think we are starting to see a retraction in the gaming industry. There was a gaming boom for a while. I think we're going to keep seeing studios closing. We need to get to a correction point. Everything is a pendulum in this world, and when you have too much of a good thing, you'll swing back and you'll lose a lot of studios, but then you need to course correct again and release more games. I don't know what point we're at, but it feels like with all these news stories, we are on that kind of swinging pendulum situation, and we'll just need to see what the future holds. But it's just another big studio closing down. You know, it's getting like monthly news basically that Studio A is closing down or Studio B. Well, you know, whatever. It's just, I don't know. The health of the industry, I would say, isn't in a particularly great spot. But moving on from there, what am I recommending this week? Well, I'm doing something a bit different because I need to do this myself. To you, I say, build yourself a gaming backlog. Money has never been tighter. Financially, we're all in different places, but the world is in a really difficult spot right now. And maybe you're thinking, what do I do? What do I play? Maybe you're like me sometimes and you just flick through your PlayStation, you're like, I have no idea what to play. Build a backlog. And it's never been easier because you can use AI like ChatGPT, Claude, whatever it is, to literally help you build it out for you. So the work, you don't have to do all the work. You can get the AI can do the work for you, and then you can get it built together. I need to build mine because I have so many games that I own that I haven't played. And some of them you can, it's totally okay to start a game and not like it and then just leave it. Like, that's totally fine, but I reckon my completion rate on games has absolutely plummeted. Some of that is, of course, because of PS Plus, where I can try a game with absolutely no strings attached, and it doesn't matter if I only play an hour because it was free, so there you go. So here's where you start. Write down every game you own that you haven't played. That's it. Then you're going to organize it into whether you're going to leave, play, or like have on your backlog, and start ordering them. What order do you want to play them in? Maybe, just maybe, you have a sequel there, so that means you're going to have to play the original game first before the sequel. That might be something you have to do. But yeah, build a backlog. I'm going to build mine in the next couple of weeks, and I'm going to start going through it because there are too many new games, and I can't afford to buy all the new games I want to buy. And I've got games that I want to play that I haven't played yet, so I need to, find the right balance. And finally, this week's listener question, definitely not one I've written myself, definitely not. The question is, has PS Plus changed how you value games? Do you find yourself less likely to finish something or even really invest in it because it costs you nothing to start? Thank you very much for that genuine listener question. The obvious answer is yes. PS Plus has absolutely changed the way I play video games. It has changed. I think it has changed how everyone plays video games from the glory days of when I was in school to now. The gaming industry is in a significantly different place, and when it comes to playing games, I find I scroll for ages on PS Plus, a bit like Netflix. You scroll for ages, you go, oh, maybe that looks good. You try it out for 30 minutes to an hour, and you don't like it, and you leave it, and you go to something else. And the habit happens all the time, and I'm finding I really have to work hard to actually sit down and just stick with one game. If I've bought a game, I'm more likely to then stick through it. But also, if I've bought a game, it's because I actually really want it, and that's the difference with PS Plus. Sometimes I'm playing a game for the sake of playing a game, not necessarily because I want to play that game. So that's how I feel. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you've got a question or a topic you want me to ramble about, drop it in the comments on YouTube and or Spotify, and let me know what you'd like me to chat about next week. Okay, that is everything for this week. I am slowly dying here in this heat while my PC is pumping out stupidly warm air into the atmosphere. Hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Hopefully it's keeping you cool in these warm times. And I'll be back next week where we're going to talk about the future of Assassin's Creed in light, of course, of Black Flag Resynced coming out on the 7th of July. I get the date wrong every time. But make sure and check out the previous 2 episodes. Make sure and check out the stream series on the channel. And I will be back next week with episode 4 of the podcast, talking all things Assassin's Creed, potentially with a guest. We will see if I can get that sorted. But thank you so much for watching and listening. I've been Joe Plays Games, and I will see you again very, very soon. Bye.